All right. Well, hello everyone. Welcome and good morning. My name is Rina Vernovskaya and I'm the CEO of 280 Group. And I want to thank you all so much for joining us this morning. We have an awesome Ask Me Anything discussion on how diversity, equity, and inclusion empowers your products and teams for success. So 280 Group has been in business for over 20 years, and we've already seen the changes both in our classes and at our clients. And this is exciting because we all know diverse teams perform better. I mean, there's plenty of studies and data out there to prove it, but we still have a long way to go to have truly diverse representation in product management, both here in the US and all over the world. So I want to encourage you all to please keep attending these conversations, make your voice heard, show your support, and encourage more participation, because we really believe that if you can see it, you can be it. And even as an ally, just by showing up and showing your support, you can really make a difference. So thank you again for joining us this morning. First, I'm going to go over how you can submit live questions. So please type in your questions into the chat box. This is an Ask Me Anything. It's going to be a Q&A throughout, and we will even invite you to unmute yourself and ask your question live. Many of you have already submitted your questions in advance, and so our panelists will also be answering those questions live as well. Now, let's meet our panelists. And as you can see, we have a great panel today. So I'll ask each panelist to introduce themselves and tell us why they're passionate about this topic. Keisha, why don't you kick us off?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Quisha Light, and I manage product development at Portland General Electric Company. So probably a little different than many of you in the world of product management. But I'm passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion in this work because if we say this is about our customers, if we say we're trying to deliver the things that they need and we're trying to deliver value for them, and we need to know who they are, and they're not just one homogenous group. There are many people in our customer base, and our work needs to reflect that we understand and we see our community for who they are and what they need.
Thank you, Quisha. Hector, why don't you tell us a bit about yourself?
Sure. So Hector Enriquez, I'm currently at Cognizant Soft Vision. We help clients transform their products. I am currently in the banking financial services vertical, but my background is in telecom. I spent about 18 years at Verizon doing network engineering and product. Working on Internet of Things was a last area I worked on. And speaking of diverse backgrounds, I am now in banking financial services. Go figure. But my passion here within DNI has mostly centered around diversity initiatives. Back when I first joined Verizon, I was a big proponent of recruiting underrepresented employees within Verizon. I was also a university campus leader within my Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers campus organization, as well as a vice president in the New York City chapter. And then during that time, I basically helped Verizon with their recruitment efforts on campus for undergrad and graduate, along with supporting other affinity groups throughout my time at Verizon, and now doing similarly at Cognizant. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector, and that is great to hear. Olamide, why don't you introduce yourself?
All right. Good evening, everyone. It's evening in Lagos, Nigeria, where I'm dialing in from. My name is Olamide Danso. I am the first product manager at a startup in Lagos, Nigeria called Bundle Africa. We are a social trading app for cash and crypto. I'm very passionate about this topic because in my professional career, I have found myself to either be the first PM, the only woman at middle management level, the only Black. And so there are a lot of experiences that are quite personal to me. And that's one of the reasons I'm very passionate about this topic.
Thank you, Olamide. Thank you for being honest about that as well. So I'm going to kick us off with some of our questions. And I see actually Hector has joined us. So Hector, first question, I'll actually, I'll say it first, and if you want to add anything, please unmute yourself after. So Hector asked us, what are the benefits of increasing D&I efforts for product-centric companies? How does increasing diversity and inclusion impact product growth and adoption? Hector, do you want to add anything to your question? Let's give you a moment. All right. So if not, why don't you take this one first, Olamide?
All right, thank you very much. That's a very good question. I'd like us to go back to the basics, which is really around what a product is. A product is something that solves a problem. And so for a product to solve a problem, there has to be a clear understanding of the problem. One of the things diversity, equity, and inclusion allows us to do is bring different perspectives, especially when we are in product discovery stages. So we're asking broader questions. We're asking more questions to really, really nail and understand the problem that we're trying to solve. Now, when we have members of our team who are some form of representatives or show some form of representation to the customer segments that we are trying to attract, what this helps us do is we're seeing things through the lens of the customers that we're trying to attract or the customers that we're trying to retain. And so when you look at DEI, what it basically does for you is it gives you a better understanding of the problem that you want to solve, which then translates into increased and improved customer experiences that go way beyond what your competitors are doing. Now, in another way, because you're looking at things from a broader spectrum, what it means is you are not losing out or leaving any customer segment behind. And if you leave any customer segment behind, they will churn and move to your competitors. And except you have an amazing marketing budget that your CFO will not be too pleased with, by the way, you don't want to spend a lot of money reactivating people who have churned for something that you could have avoided in the first place.
I love that answer. Quisha, do you have something to add on this really important question?
I mean, when we look at the benefits, I think you said it in the beginning, Rena, you know, we've seen it proven over and over. There's a competitive advantage, there's a bottom line impact. We don't, you know, I think that part of the conversation has been proven over and over again. Bringing the various perspectives in is critical because at its simplest, you know, I think Olamide put it right. It's, you know, you're solving a problem. And if you're solving a problem, that means you're creating value for someone. And when you create value, you get to capture that as a company. And that's in revenues, that's in, you know, good stats from customers, whatever it is, you're getting all that value too. And if we're bringing all the perspectives in, that means you've had the good decision making, you've had good engagement in your process across not just your customers, but you're thinking about even the views. If you're bringing in the views on their product team and they're thinking about it in their processes. So all that engagement, all the decision making, all the innovation, everything is leading up to creating good value and capturing good value. So that's going to drive your growth.
Quisha, there's something about, I think what you started mentioning, there's also an internal benefit to the company as well of showing that we are a diverse organization, and it helps your people grow as well. So there's a second order consequence of also encouraging your people to feel like they are represented. So great answer. Hector, do you want to take this one as well?
Yeah, so the lens that I have is from a large Fortune 500 US company. We have offices, I forget the number of countries, I think it's like 60 or more. And so for us, within the locations and studios that we have, our clients want some assurance that we understand their regional segments. And what better way to do that than to have that representation on the team that's facing the client to also get through that, you know, improvement in communication, you know, time to ideation, time to launch improves because we better understand who not only we are supporting from a client perspective, but the end users, because we have those individuals, those segments on the team. So that comes from my large corporate perspective.
Thank you, Hector. So similarly, we had another question here, and this one comes from Emily Silverman. And she points out that investing in diversity and inclusion as an individual, it's a cultural change, right? It has implications in everything that we do. It's in the habits and the behaviors. So she's interested in learning from you panelists as to how do you practice inclusion as a habit in everyday work. So Quisha, what do you think? Could you give some perspective on this?
You know, one of the things that I think sometimes I've heard people say, well, as a person of color, you don't have to think about this. And I said, well, actually I do, because diversity, inclusion isn't just about race and ethnicity. People have many challenges. You have, folks that are hearing impaired, what have you, and you need to be able to have some curiosity, some empathy, asking questions. I mean, I have to practice this every day. I wish I could turn my camera around and show you. I have a sign on my wall that says, be curious, not judgmental. And that's how I intentionally practice inclusion and belonging. You need to be curious and ask questions. You need to put yourself in the shoes of your, of your coworkers, customers. Be empathetic. And one of the things within my team that I really try hard to do is create space for people to show up however they need to show up. And that gives a sense of belonging. And so one of the things I'm really trying to focus on in my own practice is not just looking at saying, how am I making people feel included, but how do I make people feel like they belong? And that word really says something very different to me. And I know for some people they're the same, but when you feel like you belong, you can take off your shoes and relax with people, right? You kick back, and I want my team to feel like they belong. And that's just kind of the focus for me.
I think that's a really beautiful message. And I'm just so happy to have you on the panel so that you could share the perspective as a leader of what leaders can do. Olamide, you mentioned that oftentimes you're in the position of being the only person, the only woman, the only Black person. How do you practice this and set the example and the tone in your organization?
All right, cool. So one of the things that I've learned in my career is paying things forward. So one of the things I try to make sure I minimize is the challenges that I have gone through. I try to make sure that if someone else is coming on board, right, I reduce the challenges or eliminate them where I can. And so for me, I have leaned into different communities where I find support. And so what I then try to do is create like a multiplication on my teams or wherever it is that I find myself, to make sure whoever is coming in also feels like, hey, I'm here, you can see me, I'm surviving this, we can do this together.
Yeah, it's that if you can see it, you can be it. So you have to be a leader and an example. So Colette, you actually sent in a really great question in advance, and I see you're chatting right now. Do you want to ask your question live? Please unmute yourself.
There we go.
There we go.
No, please, if you'd ask it, that would be fine.
Okay, so thank you for submitting this question. I think it's really top of mind for many of us. It's that, how do you develop and integrate use cases for people with disabilities? So when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, it's important to remember that, and I think one of our panelists said it, diversity, Krisha, you said it, diversity is a lot of things, right? It's not just skin deep. And so disability, and including disability and being thoughtful about disability is also really, really important. So, so can I ask Hector to take this question of how do you include disability?
So, I guess a few thoughts. Again, if you're in a large enterprise, there are affinity groups, or if you're in a smaller firm, you can join outside organizations to give you a perspective of their world, their universe. If you're I guess if you're always seeking to be curious, look to these other organizations to be informed and get educated. I will say that I don't, so for myself, I don't say that I am color challenged. I went to engineering school not knowing that I had a color deficiency. And it was in my 20s that I learned that I couldn't see certain ranges of color. I'm not colorblind, but I was working on a recent client, and it turns out that their CEO, we were building some executive dashboards that are all about colors and numbers, very dynamic. And the CEO was also color challenged. So here was my opportunity to kind of raise my hand and volunteer myself and work with my team to say, I can give you a different perspective. Are we not considering color disability to these individuals that are mostly male, and it's I think 6% of the U.S. population of male are color challenged, when the team wasn't really thinking that way. So this was my opportunity to just share, and that started having an open conversation around what does it mean to be color challenged, colorblind. But I did recognize that a lot of folks just didn't quite understand what that meant. I didn't mind sharing that, but it also just reminded me that I should just continue to be open about that. Yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, Hector, for sharing. Olamide, do you have something to add on this? No, okay. Krisha?
No, I really appreciate Hector pointing out the affinity groups, because when I think about, we had situation at PGE where we didn't even think about, as we were putting out some commercials, that we didn't have like closed captioning, little things. And it was because of our ABLE BRG, our business resource group, that we started to say, oh, wow, yeah, that's important. Why didn't we have that? But reaching out to those groups has been really helpful to make you stop and think about use cases that you otherwise wouldn't even know existed. I'd say the other thing is we are trying to do more isolated focus groups, and just really sitting down and talking with customer groups to understand what are the specific needs, how are they interacting with energy, how are they interacting with, being able to share with them and educate them on some of our products and services. Why wouldn't you be able to, why aren't you participating? What could we do differently? So we are, this is something my team has just started, is isolating and really identifying some of the groups that we can sit down and then do focus group qualitative work with. And that's proving really helpful to us.
Thank you for sharing. I'll just add, if you're trying to build a business case for including this perspective in your product, just remember to think about the implications of not putting it in, right? When you find out later, either through lost revenue or even for compliance and regulatory reasons that you're not compliant with American Disabilities Act, for example, it can have a real cost to your business. So it's easier to start thinking about that today before you even launch a product that you're putting in that thought. So thank you, and thank you again, Hector, for sharing. So I'd like to move on. Hector, I see that you actually put in a really great question. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask it live? Okay, so Hector is asking that the economic slowdown in the US has triggered a she-cession. I love this word. I think it also happened in 2008, but we do find that when the country enters into recession, it often affects women. So how has this impacted the women and product teams within your organizations? Which of our panelists could take this one? Krisha, go ahead.
I can jump in, well, because I've had to deal with the teaching and working from home, and at times wondering, oh my gosh, how am I going to balance all of this? There are 3 children who need me and we're not usually all at home at the same time doing things. But I have employees who are struggling with, how do I keep up my work? My children are home now, and it was just like they were facing, my husband is continuing to go out and work, and but my work is now in the house, and how do I keep this, how do I even stay involved? And I'm thankful that our company just made a decision that said, we will be flexible. We will do whatever it takes. Let employees know that we're all getting through this together. So I didn't have people, because I had employees who were saying, I don't think I'm going to be able to work a 40-hour week. I just can't. And we intentionally allowed that flexibility. We allowed women to work whatever hours, all employees to work whatever hours were necessary to get over the hump, because it was a challenge. I've seen babies' bottoms on the screen during meetings and other things. So it is what it is. And, we just had to, at the top, that decision was made, and it was easy for it to trickle down to the rest of the company. So we didn't lose anyone. And I have a team that's grateful for that, and especially the women on my team who had children at home. So.
It's a great story. I know my cat has walked into a lot of Zoom meetings at this point. Any of the other panelists want to add to this question? Hector, go ahead.
Sure. So I think that's part of the reason why I'm here too. We don't have enough women in product management. But Cognizant, SoftVision did a good job of, we're already a highly remote organization since we support clients globally. But I think it was like less than 20, maybe 24, 48 hours that the organization enacted certain, basically, not even, I wouldn't say positive, changes to permit a lot of flex time for people to do what they needed to do in order to support their family so that they can eventually do their jobs. I guess I cannot share that perspective of being a woman in product, but at least from a team member perspective, I see that we did a very good job of being very flexible throughout the entire pandemic.
Thank you, Hector. I want to add that the Women in Product organization has recently published a really great report on the state of women in product management. I encourage everyone here to read it because there are really helpful tips, especially if anyone here is attending as a product leader in their organization. Many women come from very diverse backgrounds when they enter product management, and they often don't have the necessary skills or experience or access to mentors. So there's a lot of really helpful tips, and I encourage everyone to please download their report at Women in Product. Yes, we can share the link for the report as well, Nicole. All right, I'd like to, and thank you, Hector, for asking that question. So I'd like to ask Emily Silverman to please ask her question live.
Sure. Hi. Hello. Yeah, I'm curious to hear something that I have heard a number of times, particularly in spaces where we're developing newer products. I'm curious how you respond to people who say that diversifying a target audience broadens the scope of a product too much, and that success actually relies on a more narrow target audience. And again, I see this particularly in newer products, but even in older products, sort of saying like, okay, we're going to start with this target audience and then move on to another target audience. And usually those lines are on the lines of diversity and inclusion. And I've had that pushed back quite a lot in my career, and I'm curious how you guys would respond to that.
Thank you, Emily, for asking that question. I will say that as a business leader, I have heard women being considered a niche market as well. So we very much know that it's not a niche market, and that there's a lot of opportunity in understanding the unmet needs of various populations where diversity is not a niche effort. in my opinion, but great, valid question. Which of our panelists would like to take this one first? The hard one. All right, Olamide.
Okay. So one of the things that I've found very valuable in my career is the power of data. I feel like when we have these kinds of conversations, when we're talking about the size of the market that we're targeting, the only thing that really helps you at that point is data. And so once you can do your homework and get data, it almost shuts away every form of doubt, right? The numbers will not lie. And so my advice will be to focus on the data. Let's not have an emotional conversation, but let's show the numbers and what we expect the numbers to yield if we go in certain directions. And it kind of makes the conversations easier once we start talking hard facts. Yeah.
So I love that answer, Olamide, and Keisha, I'll call on you in just a moment, but oftentimes when we're in these situations, when we're on a frontier, something that a company has not been used to doing, they might not have easy access to data to bring to the conversation. So I agree, when you can, always move first with data. It does take the emotional aspect out of it. And there could be some studies, population sizes. You could even potentially be doing some more customer interviews with some of those market segments to see the demand. So Keisha, do you want to answer this question as well?
This is really interesting for us, particularly in the energy space. We often, most of the world that we exist in the energy space is, our customers have been in the background, right? Most energy companies didn't really care how you were interacting with the power. Most of you didn't care how you were interacting with the power. You just turned on your lights and that's all that mattered. And now we have a need for our customers to really be engaged in helping to reduce load and the impact on the system. And we do that well with customers who can afford all the tools and the technology and the gadgets, whether it's solar and EV chargers and all these things. So with those customer groups that can afford it, we do that really well. They make it easy. But when we start saying how as a company, we're missing out on a big segment because we're not dealing with our communities of color, we're not focusing on those groups that are highly energy burdened, and the data is there and it shows that these are parts of our community that are heavily impacted. And if we could bring them in, what that could mean in megawatts for a utility, it has been a challenge to get us to go there as a company. So I know and understand that pushback. But as we have leaned in, what we started to do is focus on, it's going back to that lifetime value of a customer, thinking about customers in that way, because over time, if you continue to ignore, those customers are going to be seeking out other people, other things, other products to meet their needs. And if you can, so as we began to think about what is the value of this customer, what does it mean when we lose that customer? What does that cost? We had to really just start flipping those numbers around. And it went back to the data again. It's just looking at the data in other ways. What is the cost of losing? What is the lifetime value of a customer? So I think, you really have to begin to sometimes flip it and not just be focusing on why this is the target market, but saying what happens if we don't target this market? How do you start to quantify, the loss there is where we've had to really focus. And that's making a difference in our company, making some new choices around where we go after, so.
Keisha, I love that, because we need to make a business case for something like this, right? That's really what you're saying. You have to really identify what's in it for the company. And if there are certain assumptions that are underlying the decision-making for your leadership today as to why they might not believe that this is a valuable, allocation of resources for the company, then you really need to get a good understanding of what those assumptions are and whether or not they're wrong, and be able to have that conversation. So thank you, Emily, for the question. I love this discussion. So again, please, today we're here for you. So please continue to put in your questions in the chat. I'll move on to another question that was asked And that is, and this is one we get a lot. And Hector, I think I want you to start with this one, which is, we understand diversity is important, but I'm having trouble finding diverse candidates. So what is your recommendation for how we can improve diversity on our teams?
Yeah, a few thoughts come to mind. So again, coming from a large enterprise, so I guess let me share a little bit more about my background. I started as an engineer, network engineering, program management, then eventually pivoted over to product. But similar pain points. Coming out of engineering school, I think it was like less than 6% of my student body came from underrepresented groups. I went to a school that was like 5,000 students. When I first joined Verizon, very similar numbers. And so my method was, well, I wanted to help improve diversity numbers. And so I started supporting HR as a volunteer to help just talk about what we are doing at Verizon as an engineering organization to attract talent. In addition, it wasn't just attending career fairs, it was also doing workshops. I would work with HR to promote certain events, to attend their conferences. We hosted conference topics at these events. And so I guess what I'm recognizing is that I'm kind of following in that path now. So now still at a large Fortune 500 company size. And so I am starting to kind of spread out and basically attach myself to other organizations to frankly show my face and meet other people who come from similar backgrounds, and also to motivate and inspire undergrad and graduate students. I'm still affiliated with my undergraduate school. We all know that product management, you cannot graduate with a undergrad, at least from what I still understand, degree in product management. But there are people who have studied engineering undergrad who are considering product management. And that's my method of trying to bring in diverse talent from an undergraduate perspective. But I think just attending other events, being affiliated with these affinity groups, and just getting to speak on behalf of your profession, and I think you get to motivate people who will one day knock on your door and say, I want to do what you're doing.
Thank you, Hector. Quisha, how do you find diverse candidates?
Well, I'd say I'm learning to use the PM groups, definitely word of mouth. You know, we're starting to look at HBCUs, different college groups and things of that, historically black colleges and universities. You know, one of the other things that I've honestly found is really helpful to me is we have a lot of great people within our company. And so because we're a mid-sized company, I look for people within the company and create opportunities for people to move up and grow to some other roles. Because if I go back to the she session question, one of the things that we find is women are oftentimes leaving the workforce because they're in lower paying roles and jobs. And so if they have to make a choice between, do I keep working or just stay at, or keep working so I can pay daycare, or do I just stay home so we at least save that money? And if we can create the opportunity for them to get into higher paying roles and positions, that makes a bigger difference. And so I'm trying to identify people within our company, to be honest, and create opportunities there, working with our BRGs, asking who is interested. And so to me, that's one of the biggest things. I honestly just looked up probably a month ago and realized all my lead PMs are women. I hadn't realized that I'd built a team of women. It was intentional, I guess, to a certain degree, but I hadn't thought about the fact that all my lead PMs are women. And, we're different women of color, and, we're white women, but most of my Yeah, so I'm wondering about that now, how much of that I did consciously or subconsciously. So
Yeah, that's interesting, but it's so true what you said. I've heard it before. If you're having trouble finding diverse candidates, look in your network and find, like, ask your network, because your network also knows where the good people are. So one other thing that I would like to share is, and I learned this one in reading, I think, Working Backwards, the Amazon book, and I thought it was really interesting that Amazon realized that they were struggling to find women in their roles. And one of the things that they did to correct for that was every single woman's resume that came across the hiring manager's desk was interviewed with a phone interview, because they've identified that there was a bias in how hiring managers were reading resumes. So that's also something else to keep in mind, that if you want to hire more candidates, every single resume that comes from a diverse candidate could get a phone interview. That doesn't mean, and I want to be very clear, that doesn't mean you lower the bar for hiring at all. You never want to do that. What you're trying to do is increase the pipeline and make sure you're addressing actual bias that is preventing your company from hiring the best people. So, Olamide, do you have something to add for this question? How do you find diverse talent?
Okay, so one of the things that my company currently encourages is our participation in groups and communities. And what that does for us is we collaborate. And so sometimes it's not just sponsoring events. It could be that we're volunteering our time or we're being mentors and stuff. So when we build this kind of relationship and we have openings, we're able to forward to like job groups, you know, within communities. And then we have access to this huge pool of people that we then struggle with, like screening and all of that.
Thank you, Olamide. So I'd like to invite Raquel to ask her question. Great question, Raquel. Please unmute.
Yeah, can you hear me? Oh, I don't have my camera.
That's all right.
Oh. Okay, so great. So my question is regarding a recent study that came from Accenture and Girls Who Code, that was saying that around 50% of women, they will actually leave the tech industry when they turn 35. The main reason for that is because they don't see anyone in the leadership level that they can, I don't know, look up to, and they don't see upward mobility. Sharing a bit on my story, I've been in the tech industry for like over 10 years now, and I'm about to reach the 35 bar. And I actually still face this challenge. I actually moved it to another company because I was working previously in an environment that was basically a boys' club. So I wanted to get from you guys what actions, initiatives we can work. We have recently started BRG, a group of women in the company that I'm at right now, and we are thinking about how can we address this issue. So it would be great to know any tips that you guys have.
Thank you. Quisha, do you want to take this one?
I'd say at a company level, we have started things like women in leadership programs. We you know, so I think the company is being intentional and trying to identify women leaders, potential women leaders. One of the things that we have to do as managers, as leaders, is go through twice a year, identify high potential performing, and so that's the opportunity for you to say, okay, this is a woman, this is a person of color. You get to really think about your team and be intentional about how you're creating that opportunity for people to move up. But even outside of, because I think that study is true, but one of the things I've found in talking with the women on my team in trying to encourage them to move up, I've restructured the flow of my team to give them more managerial roles. It's created some extra hierarchy, but it's giving them the opportunity, even though I've created, small 2- and 3-person teams, it's giving them the opportunity to practice key skills that oftentimes they're told, well, you haven't had management experience. So I've intentionally just started to create a structure that gives them the opportunity to say, I have management experience. The other thing that I've been able to do is learn that women, and I've been guilty of this, we give away our work. We don't speak for our own work. When it's time to present, I don't present my team members' work. They get to present their own work to executives or board members or whoever. Give women the opportunity to present their work so people can see the leadership potential in them. You know, so those are just some of the things that we've been able to do at a company level, what I've been able to do within my team, so.
Thank you, Quisha. Hector.
Yeah, so I have a few thoughts here. I read the Lean-In book some time ago, and something that I remember getting from that is that I think there are certain cultures that don't lean in enough about their work, like Quisha said about women. And I think with the topic around women, there are individuals who I guess they don't know what they don't know. And if you're in a large enterprise, there may be some formal intentional programs to bridge the gap and increase the diversity numbers. But said differently, if you are a woman who's interested in upward mobility, but what you do know is that you don't know how to do that, then I would encourage you to knock on a door, say hi, meet with leadership, and start having a conversation that leads into a possible sponsor conversation, a mentor conversation, and you will start to learn how they navigate it. What are some of the informal initiatives that are happening around selecting high value talent that perhaps you can be participate in? But I know that's not a systematic approach, but as an individual who's looking to close that mobility gap, I would encourage you to reach out and learn how to navigate.
Thank you, Hector. Olamide.
Okay, so for me, I've always had to look outside of my current company because most of the time I'm like the only female or only Black woman or whatever. And so I found that looking into communities like women in products and just saying hi to someone who's like willing to listen to me has really helped. And so I have sponsors outside of my current organization that help me or walk me through things that I need to be doing or skills that I need to be leveling up on per time, because I don't have that kind of support in my current organization. And no fault of my employer, it's because we're a startup, and so we kind of have a flat structure at the moment. Yeah.
I'd like to kind of build on, and by the way, thank you, panelists. This was awesome to hear. It's not easy. This is not easy, and it takes time, especially because I said it, I keep saying it, but if you can see it, you can be it. And if you don't see it, it's hard to imagine, right? I do want to kind of say that there is a role for allies in all of this, right? So an important story of my own, when as an entrepreneur and business leader, when I was raising capital and I was essentially creating a business case, right, and pitching to investors, it took an investor, a male investor, to set me aside and talk to me and let me know that while my projections were very reasonable and attainable, even in the upside, they were used to seeing my male colleagues, my male counterparts, show forecasts and projections that were very wildly higher, right? And so that made me look like two things. One, it made me potentially look like I wasn't bold enough. And two, investors got used to looking at upsides and haircutting them, right? Reducing the potential. And so even though my numbers were much more hittable, the way that I was thinking about how the investors were looking at it was very different. And it took an ally to let me know that perspective. So I do want to encourage, when you're looking at mentors, it's not just one, have a board and include people who, who may know the rules of the game, kind of like what Hector was saying, may know the rules of the game that can help you play. So thank you for the question. I think, Colette, you asked another question here about, and I think it's important, so let's hear from our panelists, and I'm going to extend it. So if there's an exclusion of disabled groups and others in terms of access to education in the early years, and that overall reduces access to the market, what can we as companies do to contribute to creating more opportunity earlier in the game? Did I understand that question, Colette? Yeah, okay. Does anybody here want to talk about how we as and maybe this is more of a social question, right, versus a company question, but what can we be doing to increase access to diverse groups, including disabled groups, earlier? This is another tough one. So I'll put in my two thoughts, because I do think a little bit about different ways of schooling and education, and there's a lot of new innovation. I personally am a fan of charter schools who innovate on the typical public school. I think this is a really tough question, but anything that we could do as companies to encourage charities and other organizations that focus on this is probably what I would be doing. Quisha.
Yeah, I would say, we, I work for an energy company. We spend a lot of time in schools with STEM programs. So we invest, and we have employees participating and going out to schools and working with kids. And it goes back to, if they can see it, they can achieve it, they can do it. And so one, giving them that education early. We have strong internship programs that we're building on. Some of those internship programs are diversity focused. So we specifically go and work with organizations that are targeting college and grad school students who are are diverse. And we, like I said, we have several programs. That one that we just started, trying to get more young people of color into the clean energy field, showing them the different types of jobs and things that are available. I do a lot of volunteer work, either through my company, through my sorority, just different groups. And so, just giving and being a part of the community and showing where there are opportunities, and helping to teach those students early about, career choices that they otherwise wouldn't even be thinking about. Because if someone had told me about the energy space early in my life, I probably would have gone in that direction. But I didn't get to energy until after going to law school and practicing law for years, and then found this and was like, I found what I like. So, but I didn't know about it.
Thank you, Quisha. Hector, Olamide.
Yeah, I would like to add something there. So there are companies, large telcos, who are trying to close the broadband gap and trying to reach geographies that lack internet throughout the entire US. It's interesting because like Quisha, I would also do STEM programs. I would volunteer to talk about STEM fields into the junior high school, but I wasn't really paying attention to, well, many of these students lack technology and lack broadband to really take advantage, to start to be exposed to what is possible. So I'm happy to see that there are initiatives, not just the telcos, other large enterprises are also trying to close the broadband gap. So if you're looking to make an impact there, I don't know how, but broadband initiatives is a great place to start. And like Quisha said, certainly the early STEM program involvement would also be beneficial.
Thank you, Hector. Olamide, do you see this in your country?
Yes. So we have a number of tech programs that, we have people who sponsor. And I know that one of the things I do with some of my friends is we take a percentage of our income and we sponsor a few kids through school. It's a personal project. It has no name in particular, but we just do this random checks in some schools and see who needs to get an extra, maybe a laptop, or someone needs to pay for internet connection and things like that. So that's what I do on a personal level. I know that there are a ton of people who also do this on the African continent.
Thank you, Olamide. That's actually quite inspiring, because I think we as a society, we love to work on missions. And missions can be what your company's core product and business is, but it could be bigger than that. So for the product leaders who are here today, I encourage you to start thinking, is there a mission that your people might be inspired by? So we have time for maybe one more question from the audience. And so if you do have a question, please type it in the chat box. In the meantime, I'll ask one that was submitted earlier by Helen, and it's around unconscious biases. So we've all heard that unconscious biases exist, but how do we become more aware of them, and how do we address unconscious biases? So Quisha, could you take this one?
Yeah, I will say I spent a couple of years doing some training around unconscious bias within our company. And at the heart of it, if you accept that unconscious bias is because the brain gets lazy, it likes to make shortcuts. And that means that you have to really question when you're making certain assumptions. You've got to be willing to say, this is my brain being lazy. What are the things that I'm missing here? Slow down and really allow yourself to ask the right questions. I have to do this with the kids now, where they see the shadow and they're afraid, right? But the shadow is just a reflection of something. So instead of having them freak out, I'm saying to them, okay, so let's stop, let's breathe. What does that shape look like? Ask yourself some questions. Where light, this shadow, this darkness is because there's some light and something mixing in and it's reflecting over here. And we have to do that. When you find yourself feeling uncomfortable because you're in a room, if you're, I had to walk a white male colleague through this. I said, when you're finding yourself feeling uncomfortable in a room of employees of color, rather than you immediately getting yourself all worked up or deciding that you need to quickly leave this space, stop and ask yourself some questions. Why am I feeling this way? And what can I do to help me be able to sit in this uncomfortable state so that I can begin to engage in the conversations that will help me ultimately ultimately start to really understand other perspectives, understand what in my background has led me here. But unconscious bias at the heart of it is because you have limited knowledge and experience and your brain doesn't know what to do with it. So it gets really lazy and just makes assumptions and has you becoming fearful or ready to run or whatever. So focus on what you know, slow down and ask yourself some real questions.
Thank you, Quisha. Hector.
Wow, I love that. That's what I'm gonna definitely take away with. If I can add, I would also encourage you to have conversations with people that you typically don't have conversations with on subjects that you don't typically would have conversations about, to expose. And when going back to the belonging part, we all want to feel like we belong at work. And one way to do that is just to have some honest curiosity, to meet with others, listen, just listen. I think you will learn that new relationships will form, but also new perspectives and an awakening on some previous assumptions and maybe even biases that you had that you didn't know you had.
Thank you, Hector. And we're going to end with this question from Emily. Emily, do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is something I think about every day, which is basically how do you gather the courage to speak up for diversity and inclusion in your everyday work life? This is something that I believe in really strongly. I believe that I do speak up when I can, but I also know that in my mind, speaking up is a lot more exciting and a lot easier than when push comes to shove. I find myself a lot of times in situations where either after the fact, I think to myself, I should have said something, or in the moment saying, should I, shouldn't I? And in the end, either missing the moment or just deciding not to. An example that happened really recently for me was I work for a pretty big enterprise company. And the women's ERG in my company had a town hall with the white male CEO. And he was asked about how he, to give an example about how he encourages diversity and inclusion and how he stands up for women. And his answer was not an answer. And I saw the facilitator of the town hall, the head of the ERG, saying, well, thank you so much. We really, that was a great answer. And I was thinking to myself, no, it wasn't. And someone should say that, not, in a kind, courteous, polite way, but it's almost creating the opposite effect when his answer is so lacking and all of the women have to sit there and say, thank you so much. That was wonderful. Seems like the exact opposite of the point. And I didn't speak up. And that weighs on me. And there are a number of other things that I could speak of in my own personal experience that has happened. And I'm just curious if you guys have any advice or any encouragement, because it is difficult.
May I?
Go ahead, yeah.
So I feel your pain, Emily. So a few thoughts come to mind. Coming out of a large enterprise, the ERGs, they tend to have an executive sponsor. And depending on how big your ERG is, the history, what's going on in the corporation, the ERGs tend to form a council. That council is made up of senior leaders who then have the ear of more senior leadership. And so I totally hear you. In those forums, you may not have that moment to say exactly what's on your mind, but the message can still be relayed through other channels. And I would lean on that executive sponsor. And there is always kind of activity and surveys and points that are trying to be argued that executive sponsor can help propel. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is I'm hearing that there are more corporations that are starting to publish their diversity numbers, as an example, where they're doing more self-reporting. That will continue to unfold, but I'm happy to see that we're moving in that direction. Hopefully that's helpful.
Thank you, Hector. Quisha or Olamide, do you want to add?
Yes, so my manager recently recommended a book to me, Radical Candor by Kim Scott. I would say you should read that because it's also something I'm struggling with speaking up sometimes in heated conversations and all. So I would say you should read that. I'm 2 chapters in and I think it's a great book.
Thank you, Olamide. I'll just add that it can be uncomfortable, and this is another important role for allies, because oftentimes because they're not necessarily directly experiencing what you're experiencing, it can be often easier for them to speak up. And I think, Emily, thank you so much for sharing. Just know that your reaction is so natural, and that you just saying it right now may have inspired somebody else to have courage next time. So thank you. All right, that wraps up our hour. I really want to thank our panelists and our attendees for joining the conversation today. I love the discussion. I got chills a few times, so thank you for that. And I want to say thank you for joining us. Please continue to support diversity and inclusion efforts in your companies and just around. Keep talking, keep the conversation going. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.